Resource Agency.
And you'll discuss it at a later time.
Yeah, and prior bills have allowed anywhere from 1.5 to 5 years.
Excuse me.
Don't talk us out of it. Don't talk us out of it. You have a way of doing that.
Okay,
Say goodbye.
Thank you.
so you have any questions?
Nope.
No.
Questions? Okay, thank you.
Public
for the
comment?
One more?
Well, yeah.
You guys can't take yes for an answer.
Thank you, members of the board. My name is Brian Ornetto. I'm a supervisor in Amador County, and I appreciate the opportunity to come and speak before you. I have some information. Can I approach the board and give you a copy?
Give it to Mona.
Thank you. First, my apologies for coming to Calaveras County, but I believe it's a very important issue, not just to Calaveras County, but also to Amador. And so I'd like to address this. You're not just looking at AB 142 here today. I think you're also looking at Wild and Scenic, because they're not sitting around waiting for people to come to a collaborative conclusion. They've been shopping for somebody to carry the legislation for a new Wild and Scenic bill, I hear, very hard. So time, I think, is of the essence. And if you see state Wild and Scenic happen, I believe it'll morph into federal Wild and Scenic shortly. And there's some people that said, the statement's been made, it will not stop you from getting water into local county. I think that's probably true to a certain extent. I think it'll make it a lot harder. We have enough regulatory hurdles to cross already. I think you'd find a much higher mountain if it gets passed. But it says domestic water use. That does not include commercial. And I think you'll find it will restrict your use on commercial water. What does a county want? A county needs commercial activity. That's how you remain a viable county. Also, they made the statements, it will not affect water rights. I think they're being very honest about that. But the part they're not being honest about is, yes, you'll still have your water rights, you just won't be able to access or use them. It's kind of like saying you have a car, don't drive it on that road though. So you'll still have the water rights, they'll just be useless. I will not dispute many of the statements made here this morning. I'd like to read from East Bay MUD's legislative report by their staff on SB 1199. If you have a copy, it's about, 3 pages in, the first little blue tab. Effects of SB 1199. As written, this is East Bay MUD's analysis by staff. As written, SB 1199 would affect East Bay MUD's current operation and future water supply options for East Bay MUD and other water agencies that rely on McCollum River. It is also anticipated that SB 1199 could provide benefits to East Bay MUD in the form of restricted water resources development upstream of Pardee Reservoir. That's us and you. Also, next page, potential benefits. SB 1199 would prevent future on-stream development in a designated area upstream of Pardee Reservoir. These protections would be permanent and might result in reduced or delayed water supply development in, what do I see there? Amador and Calaveras counties, resulting in a possible increase to permanent or temporary water availability for East Bay MUD. So they're helping us, it looks like. And would eliminate the need to formulate mitigation strategies to prevent upstream projects and new locations from harming East Bay MUD's interests. East Bay MUD's experience shows that development of new or enlarged stream storage is very controversial. Though these projects would be difficult in the absence of a wild and scenic designation, a wild and scenic designation would increase the difficulty of and could preclude such projects. I don't know what more I can say. They said it for me. And I think they probably have people with a whole lot of time and that are very knowledgeable on the subject. Next paper I handed you out is Code of Federal Regulations, Chapter 2, or it's 36 Code of Federal Regulations, Chapter 2. It talks about what's really interesting. Determinations. The Secretary of Agriculture will consent to the issuance of any federal license, permit, or other authorization if, as a finding of fact, it is determined that The water resources project will not have a direct and adverse effect on the values which of Wild and Scenic River or Study River was designated. What's really interesting is the next one, bullet point number 2. The effects of the water resources project will neither invade nor unreasonably diminish the scenic, recreational, and fish and wildlife values of a Wild and Scenic River when any portion of the project is located above, below, or outside the Wild and Scenic River. Above, below, or outside, that's pretty much in. So I thought that would be some interesting information for you. I'm not talking about cute and fuzzy, I'm talking facts. Also, I think your duty, you have a duty fiduciary to your constituents, and also your mission is to provide water, and I believe part of that is protecting your water supply and your access to water. This legislation, they're carrying it, they're running with it. They're not going to stop and wait for you folks, or us. They made that pretty clear. And I think unless you put a bulwark up to protect yourself, they'll put Wild and Scenic in place, whether we like it or not. And they're not going to wait around. And I would ask, would we not want to investigate what effects it will have on our water supply? If I was looking to buy a house, I'd want to investigate, hey, does it have water? How good's that supply? What is it? Some say, oh, just buy the house. No, I want to know what kind of water's in that house. Anyway, I would ask you to support AB 142, and I thank you for your time. And I have a copy here for the clerk of the board. Thank you.
Good morning. Thanks for letting me come up here and speak to you. My name is Cliff Edson. I'm with the Calaveras County Board of Supervisors. I am here to support AB 142, and I'll tell you a couple of the reasons why is when last year when our board was voting on Wild and Scenic, I was having a heck of a time finding out true information that I could rely on as fact. You hear from probably 10 different sides what's true, what the facts are, how it affects us, how it doesn't affect us. And I'm sitting here today and I'm watching people shake their heads when people are talking about information. One side thinks it's true, one side thinks it's not true. For me, as a supervisor, I want to know the facts, the true facts. And one way to do that is to have a study to be able to learn those true facts. I can't just believe everybody because everybody has different ways of looking at things, but a study done by professionals. East Bay Mud obviously did some studies. It's very helpful for me to make a good decision for my constituents for Calaveras County if I have facts that are done by an impartial group. I know everybody's really not only politically charged about this or emotionally charged about this issue. Personally, I wouldn't mind seeing our discussions with the moderator work out. That'd be great with me. But we have to have the facts and what is the future for water in Calaveras County. And anything that affects that, I want to know truly what it is. So I support AB 142, and our legislators, they're on it more than I am, I can tell you that. And thank you very much for giving me the time.
Call for the question.
Mona, this is the last.
I'll be very brief. My name is Tim Utertes. I'm here as a member of the public. I would just like to urge you to ratify your support position of AB 142 and send the message that nobody's going to take our water or our rights without a fight. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Mona. Call.
So again, what is the motion? Just to accept support or to support? Go ahead.
Well, it was to support, but recommend support the bill, but recommend, have our staff write up the acceptance level letter the support letter will make recommendations to staff of the time frame and, what was the other?
And the amendments that they would discuss in the
Right,
legislative.
but one was timeframe and one was,
Recognizing the fact that there are past studies, that they should at least inform and part the work of the study to be completed.
I mean, I think that's all gonna happen anyway. but-
Timely manner.
Right.
I'll support that.
Director Mills,
Aye.
President Underhill,
Yes.
and Director Davidson.
Yes.
And, okay. Four with one absent, passes. Okay. Item 5B, discussion action regarding county's draft general plan update. Larry Diamond. Oh, okay.
Wanna have a,
Oh, no, I can pitch it, it's just, wasn't sure if you wanted me up here.
Where's visibility?
Want to recognize that we have Peter Maurer, our planning director, here with us. Thank you for your time. This is in regard to the general plan update. Staff has put together a list of comments to be incorporated in a letter to the planning department, and I want to repeat that this is certainly not the last opportunity for the district to comment on the update or influence its development. Agenda item is an opportunity for the board to provide any additional input, ask questions prior to submission of what I'd like to characterize as an initial letter. With regard to the board's previous resolution, 2009-05, we believe all the required tasks directed under that resolution have been fulfilled and no further action is necessary in that regard. I start out the memo with a number of general remarks, and I just want to characterize those as fairly high level and consistent with prior remarks made by the district in 2012. There's a lot of those that I felt were appropriate to reiterate. Some time has passed, a lot of folks have changed, and I think it's worth restating some of the district's positional statements.
Larry,
But-
if I just interject, I know, there is a lengthy draft comment letter that was provided with the agenda materials. We do have that available, and we can go into that if there's desire to look at specific language in the comments. Alternatively, as well, we'll be available as staff to, if any director has a specific issue they'd like to follow up on, we're certainly open to that. We'll hold off on sending the letter until its deadline so that we can provide that opportunity to you.
so the comment period is gonna close on March 19th?
Yes, that's the initial. 20th? One more day.
Has there been any recommendation to extend that comment period? Is everyone satisfied that all the other agencies are satisfied that they've had adequate time to comment? Because, that's only 8 days from now, so what, as opposed to going through it now, what would be the venue to have our comments incorporated to meet the deadline?
Well, the comments you see before you in my memo, I guess we have, 40 pages of stuff. I'm going to compile those into a letter to submit prior to that deadline. If you have any additional input you wish to provide at this point, if there's consensus, perhaps we can incorporate.
So we're not
those.
gonna get to see the final comment?
Well, it's in large part what you see before you.
And I think we would submit exactly what you see here today, unless there's different direction from the board. And I know some of these issues are specific to different areas of the district. And so again, if anybody has any questions about what we have in here, we'll be available to have that conversation offline as well if that's more helpful. But this is the letter that we would intend to send. If you think it would be worthwhile to try to seek an extension of the deadline, we could.
Well, I think the county should extend the deadline. I don't know that people have had a real good crack at this. When did they send out, weren't they gonna send out land use letters or postcards or something, Peter, to property owners that may be affected by a your land use map change, or, it seems like I saw that in the paper at one point. I'm just curious if that's happened.
I know I've seen a number of individual property owners listed as having responded already.
Yeah.
Peter Maurer, County Planning Director. The postcards are being printed right now. They're supposed to be mailed tomorrow.
And,
The comment period that was set by the board was 90-day comment period that they had set back in October when we released the plan on December 28th. The close of the period is an opportunity for me to compile all of the written comments that we received up to that date into a report to the Planning Commission and Board. But public comment can continue to come in. It's just not guaranteed I'm going to be able to continue to add more, as more comments come in later. And then the Planning Commission and Board will accept any public testimony that comes in at any time up until they make a final decision, probably several months from now.
does it seem like adequate time for the landowners to, you're gonna send them postcards out this week, and they have to, for their comments to be formalized, they have to email you or write you a letter by next week?
The,
It just seems.
I'd like to have gotten that out earlier. There was some challenges getting that put together. The specific request for individual land use changes, will be handled probably separately than comments on policies and the overall direction of the general plan. So, we'll still consider anything that comes in after that date. This is an opportunity for me to put together a report. It's going to be a very comprehensive report because we're probably going to have a stack of comments at least 3 inches thick by the time that we're done with the comments next Friday. That's going to have to be analyzed and reviewed and put together in some format so the Planning Commission and Board can understand the depth of the comments and have a informed analysis of what all the policy options are before them. So,
Well, just
that's
as
the
a,
timeframe.
just as a, as a property owner that, may or may not know exactly what's happening with their property, it would seem like you would need to extend that comment period for people you're sending these cards out to. I mean, I don't know how anybody could think that that's a reasonable period of time. I mean, particularly with all the absentee property owners. I mean, and many of these property owners are in our service area, and the area I'm familiar with is AD 604, which, there's, most of the vacant property owners are absentee, and, may or may not know what's happening with their land use. So I'm kind of concerned about that. I know we've addressed it a little bit in here, and I like our comments. I think they're general. I think that they incorporate much of what we need, but I just think that, Cliff's here, it would just seem like that's a short period of time. I think that's gonna anger some people when they get wind of it.
I appreciate that. And
Because you said they're being mailed today?
tomorrow.
And looking at our mail delivery, that's another big question. The fact that they'll be lucky if they get them on, by Saturday.
Well, that's just maybe a side note, but
And Director Davidson, I certainly appreciate it. I'm looking at it from the perspective of the district and our submittal of comments. I think if we have our comments ready to go, and again, our goal was to try to really frame issues of concern to us, to open the door for us to continue to work with Peter and the county all the way through the development of this to hopefully reach a consensus on language that we would be agreeable with. And so I just looking at it from that perspective, I would like to get this letter in sooner than later so that he can begin to work on that, and then we can, I want to thank him for he's been available to us a number of times. Larry and I've sat down with him, he's spent a lot of time with us, and he's committed that he's going to continue to do that, and I would like to get to that post-submittal of our comment letter.
I also want to extend my gratitude and thanks to Peter for how available he is to meet. I've been working with, in particular, the Wilseyville community in our community plan and incorporating many, if not all of those items in that. And Peter has met with us as a small group with the supervisor, and it's been really great. I do have a few comments, and they're kind of a general nature for this, and if now's the best time to do that, Larry, I'll go ahead. What I would suggest, there's a land use density and groundwater discussion. I think it would also be appropriate to do a land use density and surface water discussion, and maybe it's incorporated in there and I just don't see it.
I picked up on that a little bit under the water policy on page 4 or 5. I was more specific to surface water in the back.
Okay. Yeah, I just didn't, I see the water supply assessments and whatnot, but I didn't see that. And again, one of our biggest pushes is try to have land use, which will then go into the zoning to allow for higher densities in our existing service areas. We need more connections. And how to say that in almost as many words, and I know you, in land use density and groundwater, that first paragraph there where you talk about water service is most effective in higher densities and all. And then maybe just, I'd like to come out and boldly say that we'd like to see higher densities in existing service areas where appropriate. And
I think I say it twice in here, actually, on page 2 and page 3.
But Larry, it seems to me we could certainly add I think we could add another header with land use density and surface water that reiterates the same point, but highlights the fact and that's consistent with the comments that were developed in our position on it, for sure. That's in our master planning.
Well, even more specific to that is my big issue with this, every time I've seen that land use map, we've taken areas that are adjacent or inside our service areas that we have facilities that are likely to serve, and that property has been turned into resource production. And it's throughout the entire county, and it's just flat out the wrong way to be going about this. I think that from my concern is, and now we've got all these specific land use designations as opposed to being general land use designations that allow some flexibility for the economy and for property owners that have one ability over another ability to develop their property. I have a big beef with the whole general plan, but specifically, it's to follow up on your issue. We should not have these resource production areas in town centers or near town centers where we can economically provide service to. And they're scattered throughout.
Yeah.
And what they've tried to do, and I know this was work done well before Peter got here, I'm not saying he did this, but they've tried to engineer communities not knowing what the property owners desired to do with their property. And that's the big problem I have with this whole thing. They're not really taking into the property owners' capabilities or desires. They have engineered future communities not having any idea what our future community is really going to look like. And I think they've done so to the detriment of the county's future economy.
Madam President, I think Terry has the floor.
And really, it's the wastewater treatment that's going to drive a lot of these density issues, because we can get water out, and it's having to install or develop the wastewater treatment system. So, first of all, Larry, again, let me step back. Thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. The idea of the community wastewater treatment systems, which we have a number of them in, the county that we service, the septic, and then have the community leach type of operation, however you better define that. There's no discussion of that in here that I read. Do we want to put that in, or do we want to just leave that out in more general terms?
Are you referring to, say, the third bullet under land use density and wastewater, where the county might allow development in areas served by individual wastewater systems? We discussed the potential for further subdivisions with on-site wastewater and the possibility of future failing septics.
Good spot.
Is that not
Yeah,
adequately
yeah.
addressed under those couple bullets?
Yeah, that'd be a good area possibly to put, again, I see that as kind of an in-between. Your own private individual septic system versus a community system versus having a true municipal wastewater treatment, system. And so in some areas, obviously, depending upon a variety of factors, one of those three choices is going to be best. As the higher densities prevail in some of those areas, they may not necessarily need a full-blown municipal treatment system to service those areas. Again, as we have set a precedence in this county. But again, I guess my point being is we didn't really spell out that as kind of an option or something that we might want to support, that the county might consider.
I guess the only point, I think where I may have addressed that is urging the county to work closely with staff during any appropriate development design process to address the possibility of those issues. We'd like to be in those early phase discussions.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I mean, if we want to leave it at that general, that's okay with that. I'm just kind of making, as I read through this, some comments. The last thing then is on 5 of 5, West Point, and then the area that you refer to under West Point is actually Wilseyville. It would probably be best so you don't offend the Wilseyville folks or the West Point folks. Yeah. With that, and then again, knowing that area as well as I do, there is a section of relatively high-density parcels that extend out beyond Blue Mountain. And I can talk with you offline about that particular area and the potential addition of that geographic area to that paragraph. Okay. Thank you.
Director Mills.
First of all, Larry, your detail was so fine, I had to put on a pair of jeweler's glasses to read it.
Sorry about the font size.
Yeah, the font size, but I did
Summary
go
tracking.
through it, and your detail, just cleaning up all of those pieces is excellent. And you caught a lot of those mistakes, and hopefully they'll take them forward.
A lot of that is just accretion of things that have happened over time.
Right.
And it's not to the detriment of planning.
No.
They're just circumstances that have changed, and I may mention that the absorption of Wallace Lyon, Bill's connection of Millwoods to Arnold wastewater have changed a number of the related circumstances, service areas, how things are served. And so it just needs to be incorporated within the background report primarily.
Right. Your summations are excellent. I'd like to add a few things here is that the general plan does not address water supply issues from a long-term drought. I really am beginning to become a proponent of the idea if the FEMA is so crazy about flood maps and floodplains within the Calaveras County area, why aren't we talking about drought maps and drought zones within that same area? That might even affect Copperopolis due to water. If at some point we may have to declare, okay, maybe I shouldn't even say it. But this does not address negative growth impacts. In other words, should the county shrink in size, how do some of these land use designations, especially close to city centers, are they impacted from that? I sure would like to see the community plans come back into the general plan. I think they were an important element to have. And I agree with Director Davidson about resource production zones, especially around Copperopolis. If we, by the stroke of a pen, and changing somebody's land use designation, and we saw this with Cottage Springs and the snow park up there, that owner put $500,000 into rezoning that back to what it originally was used for when I was a kid. So, we have to be very careful that we don't impact negatively the financial ability of someone to use their property the way that they really would intend to use it or had intended to use it all along. Go back to the general plan guidelines, second draft 2003. It states that the major trunk lines for water and sewer be included on plan maps. And I don't see them here on this general plan at all. I think it's an important piece.
Yeah, you can find some of them on the resource production property.
That's, yeah, thank you. Not exactly what you want, but it's there.
All right.
Kids, be calm, kids. At some point, I know that the state is going to be looking at regionalizing, especially sewer systems. And is this an opportunity for the general plan to begin to address that issue? And I'm thinking specifically in Arnold, Dorrington, Blue Lake Springs, Meadowmont, where there's a lot of individual septic systems. Whether or not they're failing, we don't know unless they're brought to somebody's attention personally. But the state's going to want a clean water supply from their source county. That's reality. So at some point, I think that's going to become part of the discussion, whether it's one that is done now or somewhere in the near future. The Water Code Section 31110 says that stormwater can be something that CCWD can work on. It's not currently in the general plan maps. It's such as even the FEMA floodplain maps. Water impoundment for stormwater from, say, Cosgrove Creek or even Nassau Creek or any other creek is something that we could take responsibility for and help to with groundwater recharge or some other methodology. So I think that that's something need to be considered. General plan maps should also delineate areas of water shortfalls or delivery shortfalls, along with maybe even a drought emergency action plan. If we identify an area that has a shortfall now, that as it becomes a more notable situation and droughts continue, some type of a plan in place to mitigate that and say, no, we can't continue to have extensive growth in Campo Seco because there's no way to support that should the drought continue. Should be part of our discussion. And I think in a drought time, this is really a place for us to suggest again that we have a water element in the general plan. It's just become mission critical with the drought. And I thank you for taking the time to put all of this together. This is a great piece.
In relationship to the stormwater too.
That's okay. I did that. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
In relationship to the stormwater, you know, Ed and I and many others worked really diligently on this LID document for both Amador and Calaveras County. Stormwater management's in here. There's a lot of good info on this. I didn't see it referenced in the document, but it was supported by this agency in their staff. And so some language, as Director Mills had mentioned, on stormwater management and referring to the water resource and land use planning would be good.
You know, that,
Thank you.
Thank you.
you know, Mr. Kelly brought it up a couple meetings ago, and you know, the Army Corps has sent a letter to the county telling them that stormwater is their responsibility. And, you know, back when we were working on Cosgrove Creek flood control and looking at the different ways to retain it and widen the creek, unfortunately, it seems like that project has, you know, disappeared since it got moved over to the county side. But the Corps believes they have the responsibility, and they actually made us quit working on the Cosgrove Creek flood control because it wasn't our mandate. So it's just something to add to the issue of that. Larry, I have one thing here that I think is really, really important, and I know it was an issue, and I don't know that we adequately put it to bed here under water policy on page 4 or 5. We were butting heads with the former planning director, Castle and Cook was butting heads, and we were butting heads with them over water supply for the Sawmill Creek area, with the county not having an understanding of how we go to apply for water rights. We don't go to apply for water rights ahead of projects because if we don't have a use for them, we're not going to get them. And so we kind of need the projects to come in many cases before we can make the application to get the water right. And I know you've addressed it here, but I just want to know if it's, because we don't want that to continue to occur. I mean, we want the planning department to recognize that, you know, we have certain water rights, but we may not have the point of diversion, and we're not going to seek the point of diversion until we have and we can't until we have the project And of course, approval of the project would be dependent on us getting the diversion point to serve it. But what the planning department was doing was wanting us to get the diversion point before they approve the project. And it's just not the way it works. And,
We've had that discussion.
well, I'm just glad, I just hope that, that we adequately resolve that here, because, I mean, that was a huge, a mistake not to be able to, move that project forward. At least for that to be the reason. It shouldn't have been, so.
Our position is that we want the water supply assessments for verification of water supply adequacy to simply be consistent with the water code and government code requirements.
Right. And that covers what we need to do and what developers would need.
That covers the timing from our standpoint. The county has another view on that, and I can understand their view.
Still?
Well, I believe that's still the case. They don't want to wind up at some future point in time with a lot of empty lots and CCWD not continuing to carry the water on behalf of those lots.
Right, well, historically though, and then you bring up a point, I mean, we've never given anybody a water right. If your development moves forward, you still have to pay as you go for us, because we don't want anybody to bank all the water in the county and be the sole owner of a development. Say a developer comes in, he says, I'm gonna pay my $3 million now, because I know the price is gonna go up, and I'm just gonna sit on it. And then we may not have capacity for actual growth to occur, as it normally occurs in Calvert County, which is one or two at a time. We still have to be able to maintain that, so.
That's exactly part of the problem. Subdivisions have taken many decades to build, to infill. And the state can decide at any given time that they've waited long enough, that we have long enough to put this water to beneficial use. And it won't be forever.
All right.
Do you have comments?
Oh, I was wondering about the effectiveness of these meetings that you had, the general plan going out to the different parts of the county. Did you learn from that, from the constituents, what you needed, or?
Oh, yes. Informative and helpful, and Director Mills and Director Strange, you were at some of them at least. I'm sure there are other people that were active that I may have missed. Some of them were very well attended, others were not so.
I did have a question about the resource production up in Forest Meadows and units 3 and 3A.
Yeah, we were going to note that in our comments that there was previous
Yeah.
interest in subdividing those into high-density residential lots, similar to those that are already there in units 1 and 2.
Mm-hmm.
Percent more. Where we could find lots that appear to be less than optimally zoned, sounds PC, and they were adjacent to our water wastewater services, we tried to make note of that.
So did we go and look at our stack of concept approvals? Because many of those concept approvals are sitting on a shelf because the county can't get the general plan done.
Many of those have expired.
Most of them have expired, but the conditions haven't changed either. Very, not much. We haven't had a boom in growth that would cause us to probably reject those concept approvals.
Yeah, that's tough.
And so I'm just wondering, is that another layer that we request, that we just say, look, these are the since your moratorium, or since you started planning this, these are all the projects that we've given concept approval for. And again, I keep going back to the resource production thing, and I hate to keep harping on it, but I'm just dying to hear what resource they expect people to produce on those properties. But when we've given concept approval, we at least at one point said that property is that we could serve them with either water or sewer or both. And I just wonder if we've taken that level of look at the land use map in particular.
No, we didn't go back and find, say, from the 08-09 period, I guess that would have been the peak, when we had a
I lose track.
a bigger stack of concept approvals, and since then, well, most if not all of those have timed out. So we'd have to backtrack.
And that's another thing
Quite a number of
we need to address, because it takes so long to get something done here. We probably shouldn't, we should have a longer period of.
Well, the ones that I noted did jump out, like Forest Meadows, because we have had a number of folks over the years that have worked with us to one degree or another before property changed hands or something else happened to delay the project.
We ran out of capacity.
One of the questions, yeah,
Yeah.
that comes to mind is we talk about, higher density in our service area. Well, what about adjacent to that service area or within a reasonable distance from the service area or some of that language? Is that, I think that's appropriate to include at least within or adjacent to service area, but I don't know how the other directors
Well,
feel.
that's one of the things I don't like about all the new land use designations, and I'm not sure where they came up. I know they've been around now for, before Peter's time, but I don't know who established them. But even their commercial, like I own some C2 property that is now gonna become office something or other with a coverage area. And I'm honestly not really clear what the change is. I had pretty general zoning, but I think the land use map is gonna change. But why aren't there stages? Community center, I know they have a community center designation. Why isn't there, future community center designation as opposed to, this checkerboard of land uses that are so varied? I mean, there's industrial, but now do you know how many land use designations we added? I mean, would it be fair to say that there's double?
Peter, didn't those actually shrink in this?
Yeah, he's actually reduced them most.
Yeah, I'm a little confused a little bit as to your statement because the old general plan had a large number of variations. For example, future residential, then they had these sort of appendages that say, well, it's for this, or the resource productions for these different kinds. I think the number is about the same. There is some confusion in going back to the map. It's identified as commercial and office. But if you just look at it quickly, it seems like it's commercial office. That's going to be fixed. There are a lot of, after going back through, looking at some of the comments that have come in already, and just my continuing review of the maps, there are changes that need to be made. There's no question about that. And part of my longer-term goal is to continue to improve our working relationship with your staff as well as all the other water and sewer providers in the county to have a much closer working relationship as projects come through and as we continue to do longer range planning, that we coordinate our efforts better than have been done in the past. I think we've really been in our own little silos, and the misunderstanding about how water is provided to an area partially led to the decision on Sawmill Creek that probably had there been better working relationship at the time might have been able to be worked out. We had a good conversation the other day about that, and I have a better understanding of how it all works together. What I hope to do over the next sort of iteration of the plan is to work with Larry and Dave as well as the representatives from other districts to say, well, what can we reasonably anticipate the ability to serve both water and sewer, given some of the discussions that Director Strange and I've had as well. Not just sort of, well, we're close so we can serve it, but how much is it going to cost to upgrade to a treatment plant in order to serve that area? What are the long-term water rights and capability to expand service into an area? And then look at that to refine the map to say, okay, here are areas that for a variety of reasons, not just water and sewer, but road access and other things look at, have the potential for higher intensity development and other things that we have to keep in consideration are just some of the political nuances, the competing demands that we have. And, Coprapolis was a classic example of a workshop where it was split down the middle. Half the people said, we want to leave it just the way it is, we don't want anyone more coming. And the other half said, we need more rooftops.
But you know what all of them said? Don't raise our water rates.
Yeah.
Well, fortunately, that's not my issue.
Well, that's kind of the point, though. I mean, we've planned these communities with much more growth anticipated, and our financial structure has been based on it, and that's where I get concerned. It's like, we're gonna have to redo our financial models if you guys downzone things, and the cost is gonna go up.
And he's
know.
already started with it, asking for that, yeah.
So
I have,
we clean up, so we clean up on the map, and probably lots of changes as we go through this next stage in the process. After hearing what you said about the timing, I'll probably provide some additional time for specific land use request changes. Those are pretty easy to address. So we have to get into rewriting policy or comparing different policy requests that people have. That's going to take a lot more work and a lot more thought into presenting that information to the board. So that's why, sort of a deadline for those kind of comments are really necessary.
Well, and the land use map doesn't give somebody an entitlement.
Right.
They still have to go and do their environmental reviews and everything, and that's just, but I think it's much more difficult if you're dealing with a resource production property. You're gonna have to have a higher burden than if you're already in a community center or something along those lines. And so, I just think the most flexibility that we have near our town centers, I think it'll just make an easier path for growth and development. Yes, I'm pro-growth. I don't have any problems telling people that. I think our county needs it to survive. I think we're gonna go bankrupt if we don't. And so, I'm looking for as much flexibility. And the other part that you were talking about, okay, there's this much water, we need to do a projection of, and I assume you wanna know what the population we can sustain, and that's all good and well, but I get back to the, do you have a capable landowner that actually can accomplish it? If you don't, if you can give a guy commercial zoning, he's got no desire to do anything except, have 10 cows on his 80 acres. We're gonna leave areas out that could develop, but because we're gonna wait until that guy develops. And I think it should be same as with the water development rights, should be first come, first served, in regards to the ability to serve that area. And once we have depleted our water resources or on-site septic, then it's too late, and something else will have to come. But I just really want it to be a general plan as opposed to be what I think it tried to become. And I think that you and others are trying to fix it, but you're making it more general than it has been. I think it's been very specific. So I like the direction it's headed. I just don't know that it's there yet.
yes. This is just a point, Larry, and I know, Joel, you and I have talked about it. It has to do with the Vallecito lift station, is if you look at the FEMA flood maps, it's in a flood zone, and it isn't because it is, it's because it's a mistake. It doesn't, the flood zone doesn't even follow the river course. It goes right over the top of our lift station.
Oh, you're saying the map is in
On
error.
the map as an error.
Oh.
So it's just an opportunity, possibly since it's in the discussion, to clean it up.
And just on that point, we do have an MOA that we're processing with FEMA to correct those maps finally.
Okay.
Right, that
Yeah,
was a
yeah,
big.
get the flood zones in the creek and get them out.
We've identified a lot of inaccuracies on those
There's a lot of them that are,
FEMA has finally agreed that, yes, those
Right.
maps do need to be fixed, and we will go through the process.
it's not the only spot that's like that. I just know that personally. Right.
We've heard it all.
Could I just ask one small question about the general plans? And you said that you were incorporating those and
You mean community?
Community plans.
community, excuse me, not general.
That's an area that still is a lot of debate going on. The direction, although it wasn't a vote of the board, but the board had a workshop a little over a year ago and concurred that in order to get the plan done as quickly and as cost effectively back up to the board, probably in the opening joint planning commission board workshop that I hope to have sometime in April or early May, to decide once and for all, are they in or are they out? I don't have a preference necessarily. They could change my workload depending on what the board decides to do, but I'll present the board with options of ways to do that. And there are, several different options that we're considering at this point in time. So I'm currently operating under what I believe to be the board's decision or direction to not include them, but ultimately it's the board's decision, and they can change that direction.
Because speaking from the community, the investment that
Yeah.
those plans have is just,
I understand.
needs to be considered, right?
Well, they were certainly considered. I read every one of them and tried to incorporate as much as I could from those community plans, because there was a lot of good work that was done.
Absolutely.
Just as there was a lot of good work that was done in the water element, and
Oh.
the economic development element, and some of the other proposals that have been presented over the years. That wasn't wasted effort. People don't necessarily agree with my conclusions to that, but that's why we have public debates on those issues.
Okay.
Madam President? I just wanted to get some clarity on one issue. Director Mills, I know you stated that you would like to see a reiteration of the position, I think this is what I understand, of asking for inclusion of a water element within the general plan itself. It's my understanding that what we have right now in the way of a water element that we would be submitting is stale and would have to be updated to be even considered. I know that last effort was many hours put in that, a lot of money was spent on that effort. I got the sense prior that we were going to try to use what was in there to inform our comments and influence the development of the general plan, but that we weren't actually going to update the water element and resubmit it. If that's something the board wants to do, we can go that direction, but we need some time and resources to be able to do that.
I think that I think that our values and comments and our interests are reasonably well represented in our comments. And I think that the planning staff is doing a good job, trying to understand what the necessity is. And I think that our new comments, hopefully, I think it's very important that we're very hard line on our comments, and because that does represent what was developed in the water element. Now, I don't know that we can get the board to agree to adopt the water element, the Board of Supervisors, to adopt the water element as it is today. I think we would probably have to extend a lot of staff time. And so while I recognize that it would have been nice, I'm not gonna die on that water element hill. As long as our values and the economic engine that we need, is satisfied with the general plan. I want our comments to be in there. I want and not just ours, but I think we represent some of the smaller districts that don't have a very, big voice, that may not be going through this. So I hope that we will do that on our own, but I'm not gonna say that that's a necessity for me to support this.
If the board doesn't have a direction at this time about it, I understand, but I certainly would like to have it brought back up, that we revisit. If it's stale, it's information that we're using to drive our business model that needs to be revised at some point in the future. When that point is, it's gonna probably be up to the board to decide.
Peter, 6 months from now, when you guys adopt the general plan, that's a joke. Well, it would only make it 8 years and 6 months, so. But we can go back and revisit this. Once the county has a compliant general plan, then they can begin to add additional elements, or would they have to redo it each time?
Can you do an addendum?
Anytime you want to add something or change something to the general plan, you can do that. And there are certain rules as far as how many times you can do that during the year, depending what the element is in. My intent is to go back to the board on a regular basis, I said this before, at least every 2 years, if not more often, and say, how are we doing? Is there something that we're missing? Do we need to add something? And it's a heck of a lot easier to do it a little bit at a time than to wait 20 years and say, oh, we need to rewrite the whole thing, and then spend 10 years doing it. So I would hope that we would be able to go back and add some things. And for example, some of the community plans that really aren't fully developed yet. We don't have to add those now. We can add those later. I know that there's been promises made in the past and they were never followed through with as far as, we'll add a community plan later. But I intend to do that, to the best of my ability and the resources the board provides me to make sure that's done. But I want to make sure that we look at our plan regularly and say, where do we need to fix it? Are we moving in the right direction, or have we created some hurdles that we didn't intend to? Are there changes in economics or population growth or whatever, demographics, and say we need to adjust here or there, modify some policies? It's so much easier to do that, a couple at a time, than to rewrite the whole darn thing.
So maybe it's a point of just waiting until you get what you've got on the table, and then we can come back and revisit it.
Yeah, I think
From
it's,
our side.
I just don't want to be impediment to the, because the
No.
county's suffering without a
No.
general plan. I mean,
Right.
it's economically, nobody wants to invest in this county. And so I just don't want to be an impediment to that. I do appreciate your comments, and I would be supportive of trying to work toward something that we can
in the
ease ourselves into, but
Director Strange?
Well, in relationship to the water element and general plan, I think I heard Peter speak a little bit ago about his intent to really start incorporating water resources and land use planning together and coming to us and the dialogue that will be established from that. I commend you for that. It's long overdue. And if indeed we can do that, I'm totally comfortable saying, let's hold off on the water element of the general plan and let's work with the Peter and his staff on the water resource land use planning and just kind of see how things go.
As
My
far,
commitment
yeah.
on that, it's sort of surprising to me how limited in the past the county worked with all the other agencies that are part of the team to allow and accommodate new development, whether it's fire protection. The county road system is within the county, but even then the discussion between public works and planning seemed to be pretty minimal.
oh, the agencies didn't like each other.
Okay.
I meet regularly with the fire chiefs now. We're trying to get a fire prevention officer on board that we can look at new projects and make sure that they meet the fire safety access requirements. CDF, there's very limited, of course. So all those things I want to bring together to have a much greater working relationship. All the entities that are part of the development review process.
New day.
I just want to say that water element, we talked early 2000s is when we first started talking about the water element. And Peter alluded to how much change there has gone on since we put that together and started to build it. So again, it would be a matter of going through and investigating.
That were very valuable and need to be considered as part of the general plan.
Well, the way it's spread out through, your water references, as Jeff said, satisfy our needs and our wants, and we'll just keep building.
Well, can we, in the interest of finishing this meeting today, so you're asking us to...
Give consensus is what,
What are you asking us to do to...
consensus.
We don't need a formal board action at this point. We've received great direction. I think, Larry, do you feel like you have the information you need to complete the letter? And
Quite a bit.
and then, like I said, we'll hold off on sending it until, I'd like to send it the 19th, just so I was comfortable with the 19th, so hearing a change, I think we'll send it on the 19th. And but if you have anything else that comes to mind you'd like to purchase with, please do.
Okay. All right.
Thank you, Peter.
Yes,
I
thank you.
would provide the opportunity for public comment, though, if there is anyone who'd like to comment on this.
Public comment?